medical device companies plan the development of their next generation smart personal medical device, they must consider not only the creation of the physical medical device, but also the corresponding data strategy. Well-planned and executed data strategies will facilitate regulatory approval, secure market access, increase user adoption and retention, and of course, improve healthcare. This webinar will cover the core elements needed to underpin a data strategy for implanted wearable devices in a digital-first approach, including the value of smart implantable and wearable medical devices, the unique data challenges and how to tackle them, and developing a winning data strategy. So with that, I am delighted to welcome our panelists here this morning to share their expertise and their perspectives on this topic. With us today is Bill Benton. He's the Director of Solutions MedTech at S3 Connected Health. Steve Yates is the Director of Engineering at Boston Scientific. Agogo Ekpuke is a Distinguished Engineer and Systems Architect at Medtronic. And finally, Randy Schistel is the Chief Operating Officer at Voxi Health. So, gentlemen, it is wonderful to have you with us here today. Let's go around the room and maybe you could share just a little bit more about each of your backgrounds and why you do the work that you do. Bill, I'll start with you.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate being here, and we're proud to be a sponsor and partner with Medical Alley to bring this event forward, and I look forward to having a great chat with my distinguished colleagues here. I'm Director of Solutions for MedTech in the U.S. Here for S3 Connected Health. S3 Connected Health is a 25-year plus company who works hard to be a digital partner with some of the largest pharma and MedTech clients in the world, as well as small startups. We're very engaged in providing consulting strategy, design services ranging from embedded, mobile, and cloud, as well as providing a platform that we can utilize on behalf of our customers. I'm trained as a double-E physicist. I've had roles and responsibilities at some fairly large companies as well as some smaller ones on the engineering side. I've been developing medical devices and products for close to 40 plus years. Going back to the days of the 80s and DICOM and sending images, fast forwarding to wearables at Non & Medical, where I was head of engineering. And about 15 years ago, I left and moved to the dark side. I've been doing business development and working with people to develop their ideas and get them turned into products.
Thank you, Bill. Steve, I'll go over to you next.
Thank you, Ben. My name is Steve Yates. I'm a Director of Engineering for medical equipment at Boston Scientific, and I have over 30 years of medical device experience in implantable design, connectivity, IoT, and capital equipment. And I think Ben said at the start, why do we do this? The biggest reason, really, there's two reasons. The mission, medical devices ultimately try to improve the outcomes for our patients, and that's gratifying to see. And I think as my panelists can also attest to, getting to meet some of those people occasionally can boost your level of engagement in the mission. And then the people. And for some reason, I don't know what it is, but medical device companies just tend to attract people that you want to work with. And I've been fortunate to work with some awesome individuals over the years and have great friendships and relationships with all of them. So those two things keep me coming back.
Thank you, Steve. I talked to so many people who are in this line of work for their mission and vision too. So we appreciate your time here today. Agogo, I'll turn it over to you next.
Thank you, Ben. Hello, everyone. I am delighted to be on today's webinar. My name is Agogo Ekpuke. I work for Medtronic as a distinguished engineer and the systems architect for the digital technology business unit. So most of my career has been in MedTech with a primary focus on digital health and connected care solutions. Prior to my time here at Medtronic, I worked also for Becton Dickinson, Baxter Healthcare, Boston Scientific, and Guidance. So I've really been in this space for a while. I see how we've used technology to make an impact in healthcare and people's lives. I'm really excited about today's topic. I'm excited about data strategy in medical technology, and I look forward to having a great conversation.
Last but not least, I will turn it over to Randy Schistel.
Thank you, Ben. Randy Schistel, Chief Operating Officer at Voxi Health. 20 plus years at Honeywell and Alliant Tech Control Systems, and then 20 plus years at Boston Scientific, VP of Global Technology. Retired from Boston just over a year ago and working full-time at Voxy Health as Chief Operating Officer. And my passion is bringing new technology to market for the benefit of patients and physicians worldwide.
Randy, thank you. Gentlemen, thank you again for your time here today. It's great to have such a wide range of voices and different companies and perspectives represented here as well today. For everyone joining this webinar, we also would like some input from you. So we're going to launch this first poll question here. The question is, what are the expected benefits that medtech companies can achieve from developing a data strategy? And you're able to choose up to 2 of these answers. And it would be great to have a bit of engagement. We'd love to hear from you. What are your perspectives as some of those polls come in here as well? And great to see some of the responses. We will share the results of this question, and then we have another question in the next section as well. But we'll keep that poll up for just a moment. Bill, I will then turn it over to you to begin your next part of this discussion.
I would like to set the stage because there's been an evolution in the long history of med devices. And that's one of the things we want to talk about today is what is the promise of that evolution and where we're going to go with it and how do we create a strategy for it. So if you look at this slide, the center of the universe for med device companies for many, many, many years was the device itself. The device that generated the data, did the diagnosis, or performed the treatment. And as time has evolved, I mean, I mentioned that I go back as far as the 1980s and in the world of DICOM and starting to define standards to beam images around the world, which we have today. We were doing $1 million CTs and big machines and sending information. So as we started to build connectivity in, and this has been one of the biggest changes in healthcare in the last decade plus, we've added consumer-oriented technology in terms of connectivity to devices. And as we start to piece the device and the data it can generate and connect that information so that I can do something with that. In the old days, the technicians used to have to go in, plug something in, pull data out. You'd go out with a flash drive, you'd pull that. Today, you can have the devices phone home and provide information about how they're performing, what they're doing, are they using consumables. And traditionally, that device has been oriented towards operational efficiencies, but I can start to get device and data and do something with it. As we continue to the right on this slide, however, as you do move beyond operational efficiencies and look at how the device is being used, you can actually have device plus insight. We can start to gather insights from the device, the data. We can improve device operations. We can update the devices in the field. We can also basically monitor how the devices are performing, do upgrades, that sort of thing. As we continue then to break down the barriers between the device operation and move to therapy improvement, now what I can start to do as I get information about the therapy, about the patient, about the results of what's going on, I can start to get insights from that device data. I can improve patient outcomes. I can improve therapies. I can get information as to how my device is performing specifically with that patient. And I can start to think of offering services as well. So this starts to blur the boundary between the device and the service provider, providing clinicians with a lot more information, and perhaps ultimately patients with a lot more information. And when I get way to the right, in the world of connected health, and we're ways away from this, and we'll talk about how long and how far out that might be in the future. But that when I get to the connected environment, where I've broken down the silos and the barriers, where I have holistic care services, I can provide connected care across various therapy areas. I can provide it anytime, anywhere, and really manage the health of individuals. So what we've seen at S3 as we've worked with our clients in these areas, the device companies are entering a stage where they're transitioning from devices. They've moved well past that. They're into the connectivity space. they're starting to look at how they improve their own product and what they're doing and how they meet the demands of regulation. And the rest of the journey to be made is how we incorporate data and data strategy into the provision of healthcare to patients, both directly and to healthcare providers to interpret. So I wanted to use this as a baseline for the next part of our panel discussion, where we can dive into each of these areas a little bit more deeply. So Ben, I'll turn it back over to you and the rest of the panelists.
Thank you, Bill. And what I can do here now is to share the results from that first poll question. Again, the question was, what are the expected benefits that medtech companies can achieve from developing a data strategy? Can all of our panelists see the results of this poll as well? I want to make sure.
Yes.
Good. So everybody can see the overwhelming majority of our respondents here said improved therapy effectiveness. And then I think, interestingly enough, the rest of these options are sort of evenly split, I would say, with the number one secondary answer being reduced costs of device operations. Why don't we start with the reaction to these poll answers? Agogo, I guess I would be curious to hear your thoughts on kind of the responses here from our participants.
No, this is very interesting data. I'm just beaming looking at this from these responses. One thing I want to point out is very clearly, right? Everyone is talking about the need to improve therapy effectiveness. So again, in this industry, we're all about delivering solutions to help out improve healthcare and advance healthcare. But I also want to point out, if you look at the bottom of the poll, you have new revenues from increased device sales. This is very important because what I've seen in practice is, in one particular example, we had a connected device offering that was available to some customers. And what we found out is customers that went with a connected solution versus those that did not, there was a significant pull-through in the disposable and consumable sales to those customers. So again, we want to improve therapy, obviously, but there's a lot to be said about the business aspect of a very effective data strategy and connectivity strategy from a device manufacturer standpoint.
Thank you, Agogo. Steve, any insights or thoughts as you see the results of this first poll question?
Absolutely, and thanks again, Ben. From my point of view, I think the therapy effectiveness one, completely agree with that. And I think I've seen across my experience on the implantable side that we already take a lot of data, and really the way that the data can help therapy effectiveness there is traditionally is providing that data to clinicians in a timely manner so they can adjust things and understand how the things are working, with those patients in that context in the field. And obviously humans are very complex individuals, so things need to be fine-tuned, and I think that's how that space has come forward. On the capital equipment side that I've been working on most recently, I think that's newer and that we're gaining more experience in that space in terms of ablation and cameras and lasers and things like that. I would say the therapy is very effective already, but in that space, I think there's obviously some ways we can provide data to adjust perhaps some modalities and give the clinicians better understanding and maybe reduce time. And then when you get to the rest, the increased device sales and then new revenues from data monetization, man, that's difficult in my opinion. It doesn't mean it won't happen, and I think it will happen over time, but in the space of the healthcare system, the way it's structured today, that's really takes a lot of diligence and work from the commercial teams and the engineering teams and the marketing teams to understand how to address that space. So I think that's a bigger uphill battle personally. And then the device operations, completely agree. I think that we can better reduce our cost to provide more value to our customers by understanding the data that we get back and how we can better improve reliability in that space or other information to our customers so they can better manage their equipment. But it's super interesting results from the poll. And hopefully, as we move into this new world where there's obviously going to be way more data, I think it will start to move the needle on some of the lower elements in terms of revenue from sales and revenue from data.
Excellent, Steve. Thank you. Randy, I'll give you kind of a two-part question. First, I'd let you respond to the poll results here. And then the question I would pose to you is, what's the promise of smart, implantable, or wearable devices?
Okay, thank you, Ben. Well, first, in regard to the poll, I think Steve and Gogo have summarized well the right answer, improving therapy effectiveness, and that includes a lot of subtitles. When you think about therapy effectiveness, that can be reduced cost, that can be better insight to the physician, can be better communication with the patient. It can be, just better treatment overall to diseases that we don't know how to treat today. So the promise of using data more effectively in the future covers a broad range of potential benefits that are probably captured in that first category of therapy effectiveness. Glad to see that monetization and sales and revenue are lower in the response. That's not our objective in the world of med device. We're all about patients and physicians and driving effectiveness of therapies.
Excellent. Randy, you were asked if I could just interrupt for a second, Ben. I wanted to build on one of those points that Randy just made, and then he's got a two-part question you asked him that he can go on. One of the challenges that we see, since we have a broad view and working with partners across the breadth of this, is indeed the mercenary side of this, which Agogo touched on. But the challenge for med device companies as they do this, and where we see some of the failures in terms of development in both pharma as well as in med tech companies, is they haven't thought through that business strategy. They haven't figured out how to monetize it. We all believe in therapy effectiveness improvements. But going forward, and we'll talk about this a little later in this presentation, that whole business strategy and value equation becomes very, very important at the end of the day, because the companies are still run by profit and loss statements and that sort of thing. So having interjected that, I think there was a second part to the question, which had to do with the promise of smart devices and that sort of thing. So Randy, with that
thank you, Bill.
Yeah.
Great comments. Yeah, the promise of smart implantables, wearable devices, the broader use of data in the industry, tremendous upside promise. I think it is the current area of focus for many companies, companies that exist today and startups like Voxy Health that are looking to bring devices to market, bringing technology to market in a new way. Small teams, fast teams, but the ability to really understand how data can be used effectively in the marketplace is a big promise for the entire industry and all stakeholders. When you think specifically about the work that we're doing at Voxy Health, we're developing a breath analyzer in order to measure the chemistry of the breath, look at the volatile organic compounds in the breath, and then to create a breath print in order to match that set of volatiles to known disease states. Our starting point is lung cancer, and we've already demonstrated through multiple human trials that we can create those unique breath prints and match them to known conditions for lung cancer. But behind the hardware, the firmware, the software, the electronics, the device itself is the opportunity to really leverage data in a new way through machine learning and AI, big data sets, unique data sets where we're getting data that we never had before across the globe. We're measuring things we haven't measured before in a way that provides a portable and real-time access to results. There's a big benefit in our space for that real-time response, non-invasive, friendly to the patient and physician, low cost and real time. But then there's a really big opportunity in the data that we create over the upcoming months and years to create a breath print data bank where this new data will be available to physicians and patients to think about how to treat known diseases real time and how to prepare for unknown diseases or COVID-like threats across the globe that come, and we're not ready for them, but need to really understand them quickly. Data is probably the current frontier for medtech, and the ability to use both the benefits of the historical device thrust along with the new benefits of understanding data and leveraging that real time and over a longer term, I see as a big opportunity for the industry.
I'll take that question to you as well here too. What do you see as the promise of smart implantable or wearable devices?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And Randy, that was great. I think Randy touched on a whole lot of things there. The only thing I'm going to add is when we think of implantables and wearables, we need to think about the degrees of freedom that affords the patients, right? And if you go back to the 50s when the pacemaker was invented as a wearable device before it became an implantable, at that time, they did not have the luxury of access to data or connectivity. But we do have that access today. And that to me is a game changer because now you can untether a patient from the care setting. And what that really means is that you have the ability to monitor that patient regardless of where they are, and also respond as appropriately to the patient's care needs. So the promise is huge. I'm going to quote Randy here. We are really at the frontier in this industry. Data is really at the frontier of the next big thing for this industry. And we're still scratching the surface here. So let's see what happens in the years to come.
Thank you, Agogo. Well, with that, I will pull this question down here as well. And we will start here to our next section here, which would be, launch this here. Our second poll question as we move on to our next section here, which is the unique data challenges and really how to tackle them. This question here asks, which areas of data strategy are the biggest perceived challenges for medtech companies? And again, we would encourage you to answer up to two of these, or to choose up to two of these different selections. And we will again share the results of this poll here in just a moment as we move on to the next section here in this discussion, Bill.
Yeah, the next piece we wanted to talk about, and again, in the time allotted, we're going to have to move really quickly, was part of it is the unique data challenges that exist today as we look at implantables and wearables. And this is meant to be a depiction of just some of the areas in which we've seen technology being used for monitoring. Everything from brain activity monitoring epilepsy with implanted electrodes to, of course, pacemakers, to wearable devices such as pulse oximeters, which I'm quite familiar with, remote control for hearing and digital hearing issues, sleep monitors, ranging from wearable devices that monitor your sleep to CPAP type of devices to devices like the Inspire Medical implantable OSA treatment device. Respiratory models. So one of the challenges with wearables and implantables is that they can deal with so many different pieces of the body, and they present some unique challenges. And I've listed a few of the design concerns, and by themselves, each of those would be worthy of a full conversation. But I'll just touch on them briefly. The body location, understanding what you're looking for and where you're going, which drives this type of sensor you're putting in. The data quality. We won't get into a debate today about medically relevant information versus consumer health. There's a place for both. But for most of us, we need medically relevant information that we can utilize and data that is reliable and can be normalized and utilized long-term. Fashion and function, particularly as we move to users. You've seen an evolution in diabetes, for example, with insulin pumps that have gotten smaller and smaller that look like cell phones and fashion accessories almost. So fashion and function takes a big part of this, particularly in the wearable space. Displays and user interface. On an implanted device, you don't have a display to look at, whereas today you can monitor devices with the watch or do something there. That you have to take that into account. Power is always an issue. Security, cybersecurity is huge. I don't know if anyone else was affected by the Verizon outage yesterday, but as a Verizon user, I found that when I can't get to my cell phone and can't do things with it, and I have to worry about what's going on, it's a big dislocation in my system. As we design medical systems that are gathering information, we have to keep in mind what happens when systems fail. What happens when that phone doesn't connect when you need it to? Analytics, touching on what Randy talked about, the power of looking at that information, analyzing it, and getting new truths out of it. AI and machine learning, again, a topic all by itself that we could spend time on. And then in medical, the regulatory environment and how it plays into this. The last thing I'll leave us with on this part, and then turn it over to look at the poll question, and then back to the rest of the panel, is one of the things that this shows and unique data challenges is we can build individual devices in all of these areas, but we also create individual silos. The cardiac world today is still separate from the diabetes space, is still separate from the neurological. And one of our challenges as providers of and integrators of information is how do we pull it all together and use it? So with that as a background for the next part of the conversation, I'll turn it back over to Ben to look at the results of the poll and begin the further discussion in this area.
Thank you, Bill. And I will share the results here now as we just close that poll as well. And you'll take a look here again. The question was, what areas of data strategy are the biggest perceived challenges for medtech companies? And as you'll see here, the overwhelming top choice was data privacy and regulation, followed by a bit of a split again between the secondary options, 36% each for data usage and application, business commercialization strategy. Steve, I'll give you the first word on this. Just would be curious to hear your thoughts on this poll. And then question to you would be, which challenges do you believe are the most relevant, the most important from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you. We kind of have a saying amongst my engineers, there's physics problems that are really difficult to solve, and then there's the problems that you know how to solve that just take process and work. And I would say data privacy is more on we know how to do it. It just takes a lot of work and process to be able to handle that, and regulation. It's obviously changing, and data privacy and all the work you have to do around that is also kind of like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. You're never done. It's always a constant new challenge. But I think in that space, the companies have come a long way, as well as the regulating bodies. I got to give agencies like Food and Drug a lot of credit here, because they've really upped their game and gotten into this space and asked tough questions, and like to see a lot of good data to support this. So then it kind of gets to the rest of the questions that were answered more uniformly. And I'll go back to what Bill said. I mean, there's a ton of data that gets collected now, and figuring out how to deal with that and make it holistic is one of the biggest problems we have. And just, if you think about it, as all of us are patients too, sometimes you feel like, well, you see this doctor and then you see this doctor, and sometimes I wonder, do they talk? And so it's an interesting space, not just for medtech companies, but for the whole medical engaged industry, and how you bring that all together. Because, like I said before, humans are really complex, and you really have to have this holistic view on how you deal with that. What are the challenges? I think AI and machine learning is here now, and we're using it, and other companies are as well, and it'll become more ingrained into what we're doing. It's really good at some things like matching patterns, and then some things it's not as good at. So I think figuring out what those spaces are, and obviously this is nearly another industrial revolution that we're in the middle of, with large language models and all the work that you can accomplish there, and figuring out how to use those in this space. I mean, that's a huge challenge for all companies, and we're facing that. And I think, ultimately, for us, like on the cardiac rhythm management side, we're really good at collecting the data. What we really need to do now is get that to the right context, and how can we improve outcomes and help clinicians and patients with that data. And I think we're making a lot of strides there. On the other side of the business, with capital equipment that I mentioned before, we're getting better at collecting the data with partners like S3 Health, I think those are no longer physics problems. Now what's really hard is coalescing all this data into the right context so clinicians can make sense of it and be efficient, right? Because they're busy, so they don't have time to read, 50 pages of data that you give them. We got to figure out how to deliver that and be the most effective.
You can mute.
Can't believe I'm still making that mistake 4 years later. Thank you, Agogo. I want to remind everybody that we are going to be taking questions here at the end of today's discussion. So feel free to put them in the Q&A function as they come to you, and they'll be listed there for our panelists to answer in just a few minutes. Bill, I'm curious what your thoughts are on the results of this second poll question here, data privacy and regulation being kind of the overwhelming top choice.
Yeah, I think that is a concern for everybody. So I'm not surprised really that one became number one. On the other hand, I'll agree with what Steve had to say. I think that problem is getting dealt with. I mentioned early in the conversation the use of technology from the consumer market space, and that's communication technology like Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, the internet, and all of those things, but also cybersecurity technology moving over from banking and the things that are done. People don't think much anything today of hooking up to their bank and doing financial transactions that have great challenges with them. So I think the lesson for us in the medical space is to make sure we adopt the right things from other industries and don't reinvent the wheel on that. I will do a shout out as well to the FDA and the regulatory work that they're doing in that space. So data privacy and regulation, I think is the appropriate issue. The others, data storage, retrieval, some of the stuff lower down on that, those are all technological problems, as Steve mentioned. Those are just to be dealt with. I think the real keys for me are the two that tied: data usage and application. How do I apply it? In Randy's business with Voxy, he has a very targeted thing he's doing with regard to breath detection and lung cancer, one which they hope to expand later, but it's very targeted. In the world of diabetes, it can be very targeted. But as we're finding out, let's pick sleep. In sleep, it's invasive across all of our health and wellness activities. How do we integrate that information together with all this information? So for me, data usage and application, making sense out of what's there is really critically important.
Thank you, Bill. Randy, I'll go. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, go right ahead.
Bill, that was a good example about banking and ATM. Those are really complex operations where putting a zero at the wrong spot could make a huge difference. But then the question is, how do we break down these silos in medtech, right? And that kind of is reflected in the response here around data privacy and regulation. Because if you think about it, if you walk into an ICU or you go into an OR today, devices from the same device manufacturer don't even talk or exchange data. So a patient is receiving care with multiple devices from the same device manufacturer, and there's no seamless data exchange from the same company, let alone within the same healthcare system. So there's a lot of work to be done here. But what I do see, though, is an opportunity for the industry to really take this transformative change that data and AI is bringing and move healthcare to a really new frontier here.
And what you just touched on is really, really critically important, because as we look at pharma and at med device companies, I'll pick on med devices companies specifically, some of them are mired on the left-hand side of that first diagram, which is device-centric and doing that. There are companies that are looking at it, and the bigger companies who have much more to integrate are starting to look at this. And so there's a groundswell of movements towards trying to integrate that. Then you run into the problems of business commercialization, how I tie those things together, and how I get hospitals to buy a unified system. We faced that back in my old days of PACS and imaging. The joke was you could have any system standard you wanted as long as it's Philips or Siemens or GE, et cetera, et cetera. We can't recreate that in today's world, so we need to look for a way to send information, get devices of a manufacturer to talk together. But really, and this is where we really cross the financial divide, is how do I get devices from Boston Sci Abbott, Medtronic. How do I get them all to play together in a nice environment that the doctors can really appreciate and utilize? And that's where the real challenge is.
Thank you, Bill. Randy, I'll give you kind of the last word here on this section and just what, some of the top challenges that you see, and, what are the most important really from your perspective?
Yeah, I think we have a very astute audience, Ben. They, once again, I think picked the right top two. Regulation is going to be a big challenge, but as Bill pointed out, we'll get through that. We've had a couple of meetings with FDA already on breath sensing. It's a new territory for both industry and regulatory. And FDA is learning right along with us and anxious to learn and anxious to understand the technology and how it works. And that's something that takes blocking, tackling, and some continuous discussion in order to get aligned. What I find more interesting is the one that Steve touched on was this abundance of data and how to use it well. And because even in our simple breath test, a 1-minute breath test, we collect a tremendous amount of data. And now to understand how to use that data really well and use that for diagnosis and therapy. And then longer term to think about orthogonal data where we take breath data and blood data and vital signs and look at that over different points in time. And you can just imagine now the wealth of data that we have available to us, orthogonal data from different sources at different time points, which really become a powerful tool in diagnosis.
Thank you, everybody, here on the second section. Bill, I will turn it over to you for our third section here, this discussion, developing a winning data strategy.
Yes, and we're only going to be able in the short time remaining to flesh this out. So this is a very busy slide, and I'll go through it quickly to set the stage so we can hear from our panelists. I will point out that a number of us, including some of the panelists here, are doing a white paper on this whole topic that'll be available to folks in a month or so. There'll be a much better explanation of this. Real quickly, there's a pyramid of things that has to happen, and it's an interactive pyramid in the middle. We have data today. Steve touched on it, Randy touched on it. We gather a lot of information. We know now how to manage it. We're putting in place governance structures and infrastructure to manage it, store it, send it around, and all of that. That's the technical block and tackling. It's the base of the pyramid. The challenge for us then is to move up the pyramid and turn data into insight, into real information. And we start to do that with acquiring it, putting analytics in there, starting to look at it. So data to insight. And the big key at the top of this pyramid is how do I turn insight into actions? And then how do I monetize that and show adoption? So if you think about it, data to insight to action is incredibly important. In order to do that, it impacts your company. It impacts your business strategy. We'll touch on that a little bit more. The culture and capabilities. If you've been device-centric forever, moving into that scary world of data is a challenge for you to do because it's not taking the IT group and saying, make it happen. You need data specialists to help you do that. You put in place the infrastructure for collecting, managing, dealing with that information, updating, dealing with cybersecurity. When you move from a connected device that I can implant into a patient with little connectivity, and I say little because that's what it was in the early days. Today, I know the cardiac companies are pulling a lot of information out, but you have to create an infrastructure for getting that information, keeping it safe, keeping it secure, and doing something with it. And finally, you have to manage a portfolio of data gathering equipment that's going to last 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, a long period of time. Two ways of dealing with that. Now I move to the right-hand side of this diagram. How do you do this? You start with clear business goals. And there's two ways that we've seen this happen. There's the strategy first, where a company has a vision. And I'll say it's probably a bit more common in startup companies. Like we've been privileged to work with Randy and the team at Voxy Health in this area. Strategy first, we start to look at, I'm going to gather data, here's what I want to do with it. And that vision guides the data collection, the integration, and what they're going to be doing and how they're developing it. Or you can start at the bottom, and I call it the bottom, data first, which has been the traditional med tech company. And the bigger the company is, the more of a base they have in that area. And as I said earlier, many companies are starting to move up. There's two ways: strategy from top down. Here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's what we're going to do with it. More commonly in the med device space today is data first. I'm still tied to that device. I've done operational data and I'm moving forward from there. So there's an awful lot embodied in this. As I said, we'll be doing a white paper touching on a lot of these topics in the future, along with our panelists here. I'll turn it back to you, Ben, for additional comments and questions.
Thank you, Bill. And one more reminder to our audience here too, to throw those questions into the Q&A section here on your screen. And we'll have a few minutes here at the end to answer some of those questions from you, from our experts. As we start this sort of third section here too, Agogo, what do you see are the critical elements for a winning data strategy for implantable and wearable medical devices?
It's a great question, and thank you for that. I think I see three things, right? And Bill kind of touched on some of these, but I'm going to talk about it from the lenses that I'm viewing them. So the first thing I see is data by itself doesn't add a lot of value. There's got to be a desire and a laser focus in addressing customers' needs, the unmet clinical needs. That should be the North Star. That should be the starting point, right? And then when we approach it from that point of view, we now bring in data as a very useful tool, right? Because in the end, we have to meet those unmet needs. That's what there's always a willingness to pay for from a customer standpoint. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing, again, this is going to build on what Bill said. There's got to be a data-first approach to anything we do right now in medtech. It's not an afterthought. If you're building the next device, and Randy talked about building that breath analyzer system, that's a data-first approach. At Medtronic, we are very fixated and focused on the customer needs, but we are also very data-driven in terms of when we start building the solutions that go into the marketplace. So that's the second thing, the data first. And then the final piece I would add is we need to think big, right? We need to have a system view, a ecosystem view, really, and not just think about silos, think about that device. You need to look beyond that and have this overall architectural view and say, how does this fit within the big picture? I think if we approach if we approach the problem from these lenses, I think we have a very good shot at creating solutions that when they come into the marketplace will address relevant clinical needs and obviously generate some very decent returns for the businesses.
Randy, I'll come to you with this next question, which is, can you share any examples of winning data strategies from your work? We've heard a little bit about Voxy today. I wonder if you have any examples you could share with our audience.
You know, one that comes to mind, Ben, is the work that we did with the Med Device Innovation Consortium, MDIC, where the focus was on the reuse of clinical data. And I bring that up just because I think there's a great potential there when you think about winning data strategies to look at what data is already available in the development and planning of a new device or new therapy or new system, as Agogo has pointed out. Take a look at what exists today and what data could be reused. And in the case of clinical trials, where could we find clinical trials that have been done in the past that have data that could be leveraged towards bringing a new technology to market? And that could be a winning data strategy in itself, just through the efficiency of minimizing clinical trials, leveraging the data available to us, and as I mentioned earlier, leveraging orthogonal data that brings new insights to our engineers and researchers as they think about how to innovate on new products.
Thank you, Randy. Steve, I'll come to you next with this question. As we think about best practices around data, which are critical, do you believe, in developing an effective data strategy?
Thank you again, Ben. It's a really good question. And to build on what Randy said, as well as Agogo, I I think you really have to get at the why first. You can get to the what and the how, but the why is the fundamental issue around what data you try to get and how you move it and where you put it and what you do with it. And it's a little almost a Steve Jobs Apple problem where you're trying to ask your customers what they want, but they don't really know the extent of what your technology can do yet. And so they don't know, it's a pretty big white space. And so it's a process to get those answers and create the solutions that then will work with clinicians, and a little bit of an iterative process, I would say. It was interesting. One of the questions in this section was, can you share examples of winning data strategies? I think you asked Agogo that. And I'll probably get in trouble with my company, but I could actually share a lot of strategies that didn't work because it's a really difficult space. And you think you know what clinicians want, but then when you give them the information, you find out they really wanted B instead of A. And so it's a process to listen to them and to be a learning organization and bring that forward. But it really just comes back to first principles and trying to figure out, you know, we're all after better outcomes for patients. We want the public to be healthier, and what can we do to bring that forward? And it's a wild space to be in with all the data that gets collected and all the wearables that exist now, and you know, the latest technology that's on the different that you can wear on your wrist is just crazy. So it's a complex space, but a very fun space to work in.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. So right now we've got about 12 minutes left here in this discussion, and I do want to make sure that we have time to answer some of the questions that are coming in from the audience here as well. And I want to remind you too that there is still time here. If you have a question that you would like to ask, to please put that into the Q&A function, and then we'll get some answers from our panelists as well. So we'll go to that now. And with that, I would be, well, look here, David first asks, look ahead 1 year and 5 years from now, what will tell us if we're on the right track from next-gen devices and solutions, for example, milestones or markers? What do clinicians do new, different, or better? And how are workflows streamlined, and maybe it's impacting burnout in a certain way as well?
Mm-hmm.
And Bill, I can put that question to you first if you'd like to try.
Yeah, boy. And in fact, that'll play well to the last slide that I'll show at the end of this. But I think we're well along the path. I mean, if I look at where we were, 2009 at Nonin, we did the first Bluetooth connected pulse oximeter that was continuous certified, et cetera. And I thought, wow, the days of telehealth are here. We've done big CT and MR machines. We can beam images all over. We've done now $300 oximeters. This is it. We're going to be here. And, 15 years after that, we're still having a discussion on when connected health is really going to be here. The COVID epidemic drove us a bit towards telehealth and telemedicine, but it still isn't ubiquitous. I think the key to this is going to be when we start getting the information together. The Mayo Clinic does a concerted view. If you go down there, they'll have different doctors look at you holistically. I think the key to this is 5 years from now, when we're able to pull all of the information for a patient together, independent of what device it's on, and look at it holistically. I've often said that I think the doctor of the future isn't a specialist, he's a systems engineer. He's a systems engineer of the human body, and he's going to be able to look at all these things, put it together, and look at it holistically. So I think we have to help doctors make faster decisions with more information. I'll stop there and let some of the others perhaps tackle this.
Why don't we go to your next slide here as well?
Sure. This is meant to be the closing slide anyway. So let me just say, this is a view of the future. And so it kind of ties to, I think, David's question. This is a view of the future as an ecosystem of care, connectivity, and data, okay? Where I can take in-hospital acute care, which we've spent centuries building a system that does acute care, and we do it well. You go to the hospital, you get something taken care of, and you go home. You have chronic care. We've advanced over in the top right. We've advanced with the ability to treat diseases like diabetes and manage what would have killed people 30 or 40 years ago by having a new drug, a new dispensing system, a new diagnostic, and managing that care. If I can go to the lower left corner and I get to the point where it's preventive care, where I'm getting data and giving it to the patient, to the doctors, and we're doing things that keep us well as opposed to getting sick, then we've really made a lot of strides. And finally, episodic care as we age, providing those things that we can pull all this information together. I really see that we're going to be able to pull all that information together, provide it to clinicians, provide it to patients, provide it to caregivers, and hopefully create this ecosystem. And I think there are three big things that are needed in order to make that happen. And I'm going to touch on one that Randy touched on. It's access to data. It's not just access to data, it's normalizing that data and making it useful among a variety of different devices and in different time frames and scales. So standardization of data and the reporting of it is critical. Standards of communication and sharing are absolutely critical. And then providing people with access to it. And so the last challenge I'll throw out here, we'll go back to the questions and I'll throw it out to the folks here as well, is who's going to be the winner in this world? I'm often asked that. Will it be the med device companies? Perhaps. Will it be Google? Will it be Apple? Maybe. Will it be some unknown party that's a big aggregator? Will it be Epic or Cerner because they're the repository today of all this information? I don't think the jury is decided yet on who the winner is going to be. So to echo what Steve said, this is an incredibly exciting time to be involved in connected health, connected medicine. We've moved beyond the world of just the device. We're putting all that information together, and it's incredibly exciting to be part of that. So I'll leave it here. We can go back to the questions and get some reflection on this as well. So thanks, Ben.
Excellent. Thank you, Bill. Again, another nudge to throw any questions into the Q&A function here as well. I've got one here from one of our attendees that I think maybe goes to a point that Randy was talking about with clinical data. The question is, aren't there significant barriers to reuse of clinical data, i.e., secondary use consents, et cetera?
I can start there, Ben. Definitely, it is challenging to reuse clinical data. It has to be structured in a way that is pertinent to the challenge at hand, or structured in a way that is pertinent to be leveraged to the future. But there are so many clinical trials available today that typically we can find elements of a trial that are leverageable and can be used going forward. And I think as I look at the broad topic, I keep hearing the word systems come across. Clinical is one element of that system, along with regulatory and technology and engineering and other disciplines. But a point made earlier, I think we don't want to forget, is to make data part of your technology roadmap. When you're laying out your strategy early, make data, whether it's clinical data or device data or other types of data that you're able to have access to during the course of your development progress, make sure that that is part of the technology plan and you're tracking that as you mature through your development cycle.
We want to tell us on the right track 5 years from now. So I like this slide. So let's linger on this for a second, right? So this takes me back to a few years ago. I did a little bit of observational research, going to different ICUs, just observing how nurses use one of the devices that we made at the time. And what was surprising to me was the amount of manual task involved. The nurses will walk over to the machine with the flow sheet, capture a bunch of data, go to the EMR station, and key in all of that data, right? This was manual, error prone, and not very value add. So that's the wrong track. And that's where we are for the most part today. So 5 years from now, how would we know we're on the right track? We will see more automation. So in that example I gave, we came up with a solution that automated that task and took away that physical burden from the nurse. So there will be more automation as we move towards this ubiquitous care that Bill has on this slide. If you think about wearables and implantables, that will give us the ability to understand and prevent things like infection. So when a patient goes home after a surgical procedure, they don't have to run to the ER because things have gone awry. Can we detect that before it happens and prevent it from happening? So those are just a couple of examples of things that I see in the next 5 years. And then, Bill, to your point, who will be the winner? I really, really want the winner to be caregivers and the patients, because at some point, everyone will be a patient. So ultimately, we want the patients and the caregivers to be the winners if we have the right systems built around data solutions that take away some of these mundane tasks today.
Thank you, Agogo. Steve, I want to kind of give you one of the last words here, as we've just got a couple of minutes left here. Any kind of parting thoughts or final words of wisdom around implementing an effective data strategy?
Well, you know, I'm gonna do the same thing that Gogo did. I'm gonna go back to what Randy said, which I think could have been the title of the talk, which is data is the current frontier for med tech, and that's so true. And it's all gonna go back to let's figure out ways to use this data and improve people's lives and make people healthier, make the public healthier. And that's ultimately the mission of all the med tech companies and what they're going after. And they're trying to, you know, obviously we're businesses, but we're also, you know, trying to make sure that we do the right thing and help patients and help clinicians. So that's going to be the space that we all are engaged in. And it'll be different in, you know, someone said 1 year and 5 year. In 5 years, it's a different conversation, I'm sure. I would hesitate to even guess where, you know, AI will have us in 5 years, and it'll be a crazy new paradigm. But I know there'll still be a space for medical device companies and med tech companies, and it'll be exciting to see where it goes. And I'll just say once again, it's a lot of fun to work in this space, and you know, it moves so quickly, but there's great competition and lots of people who are super engaged and very passionate. And I'm very fortunate to have been in the space and excited to see what's next.
Well, that includes people on this call here too, Steve. I appreciate your insight there too. Bill, I'll turn it over to you for kind of a final thought.
Yes, thanks very much to the panelists. You guys have done a great job in talking about the future of where we're going. At S3 Connected Health, it's our privilege to work with companies such as yourselves in both medtech and in pharma to help try and realize this future. It's what gets me out of bed every morning. Steve, you commented on earlier. It's the ability to help people develop new products and new things, and we're privileged to be a part of that. We're privileged to be a part of Medical Alley here in Minnesota, and we look forward to working with people to bring this to fruition. So I want to really thank the panelists here. Ben, thank you for moderating. I'll turn it back to you for your final words. But again, on behalf of S3, thank you to the listeners, and thank you to everyone. We look forward to discussing this with you further. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And thank you to the entire team at S3 Connected Health for making this webinar possible. And another thank you to our panelists here as well for a great discussion here today. One final note here for our attendees, S3 Connected Health is also producing a white paper around this very topic. Bill mentioned it kind of toward the middle of the discussion. More detail with contribution from a number of industry leaders, including some of our panelists here today. That is well worth a read. After this webinar, S3 Connected Health will follow up with the recording, and shortly after, you'll also receive that white paper for more detail. So again, thank you all for being with us here today. We appreciate you actively choosing to spend part of your day with us this morning. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll be in touch very soon. Thank you all.